Well, hey everyone, welcome to a home experience. I hope you had a wonderful time singing in songs of worship. And now we're just transitioning as you guys are probably getting coffee. Like my home experience, we just kind of get settled and just kind of sit back and relax. I wanted to share some things with you today. And we're talking about James and John. Now they are disciples of Jesus, and Pastor Greg for the past several weeks has done just a really excellent job of introducing the disciples to us, especially at the very, very beginning. If you remember, he asked us if we could recall the names of those disciples, and there was a lot of crickets going on at my home experience. I know that there's a couple superstars out there. Some of y'all knew exactly who they were, their names and everything. But for me, I could not remember like at all. And I knew several, but I was like, wait, which one is it? And just kind of getting it kind of confused. Well, over the past several weeks, we've kind of setting the record straight, and I've been able to just follow along with my group and my home experience and with you guys and really see how this kind of plays out as being a disciple or also an apostle. So we know now, because of last week's message, or 2 weeks ago actually, what the difference between a disciple and an apostle is, and it's just real simple. A disciple is a learner, and an apostle is the one who's sent out. So these men who were with Jesus would eventually become sent out. And we land on today, we're moving from Peter now to James and John, part of that inner circle. And James and John, all right, so here it is. This is some little background information on these guys. Their daddy's name is Zebedee. Their mama's name is Salome. I think that's how you pronounce it, not really sure. But they're a well-to-do family. They own several fishing vessels. James and John are fishermen. They're fishermen with Peter. They're working together. They've also got servants working for them. Probably historically their boats were not made out of leather, they were made out of wood, so these guys had some clout. Later on in the story with Peter, you see Peter actually being near Jesus when he denies him those 3 times. Probably the reason why that is, reaching back to a couple weeks ago, is that Zebedee, the dad, probably had some clout with some of those religious leaders, maybe even the high priest, and that's how John was able to bring Peter into that exact moment. It's pretty cool. So this idea of them having some namesake, so to speak, or these guys who are pretty well off in that way, there's a certain kind of personality type that we'll start to see as to their ambition and some of the things that they would want to become. But I'm entitling today's message Lessons from Disciples, but it's when Jesus saw them. So this is kind of like getting us kind of understanding that Jesus is drawing James and John, these 2 brothers, closer to him. Now, I don't know if any of y'all have brothers, but I have an older brother. He's 3 years older than me. And growing up, having a brother, it was just me and him, and we were constantly in competition with each other. If we're playing basketball after watching MJ shoot, shout out Chicago Bulls, what's up? We used to watch that back in the 90s, and we were like, man, this is so great. We're gonna go play basketball. So we play 1 out of 1, then we play best 3 out of 5, then we play, and then if I lost, then we keep going until we could figure out who is the best basketball player on our driveway. Or if we're playing soccer or baseball, we're kind of always trying to like one up each other, and especially growing up. So if you understand that of having a sibling, you can kind of see this connection that James and John have. Now, James is the older brother, John is the younger brother. So there's really kind of 2 things that I've kind of like been able to really draw from in these past several weeks of studying these guys and seeing their lives kind of play out. The first thing is that you cannot talk about James and John without talking about Jesus. They are, the big word is inextricably linked. Oh yeah, there you go, using that that college word, right? So they're basically linked so tightly together that you can't pull them apart. And that's really what the point of us understanding James and John is really all about. When you think about James, when you think about John, you think about Jesus. And that's really the goal for our lives. When people think about us, we want them to think about Jesus. The second thing that I learned is that regardless of your personality or the skill set that you have or don't have or whatever, God can use all of it. And he's calling you to draw you closer with all of that stuff so that he can use it as a currency for his kingdom. And we'll see that in their lives as this kind of plays out. Now, so I want to pick up with just in Mark chapter 3, verse 17, just a very simple verse, and it's pretty cool. And it's when Jesus nicknames these brothers, James and John, sons of thunder. Check this out. It says, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, he gave them the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder. Now, I've asked several people over the past weeks, what do you think sons of thunder means? And I've gotten a bunch of different types of answers. Even for myself, my answer has changed over time. So what I want to do is I want to pause the video for just a second and you guys discuss why is it that James and John were called sons of thunder by Jesus? And we'll come back in a second. All right, guys, I'm glad that you paused the video and kind of discussed that because here it is. You ready? Nobody knows. Nobody really knows why Jesus called them Boanerges. He nicknamed them this name. Now, we can infer as to why they were called sons of thunder is because you'll see as their lives kind of play out, this idea of thunder is really a deep kind of like theological reach back that Jesus is doing, specifically dealing with thunder in Exodus chapter 19. It's the voice of God. So this thunderous presence that was on the mountain, whenever God's presence was on the mountain, thunder would erupt, right? And the people were terrified by that thunderous sound. Or in Psalms 29, there's a voice of the Lord is like a thunderous waters, these thundering waters. So this idea of this presence of thunder is really kind of like, wow, these guys have something in them, right? And then Revelation, you see in chapter 16 where there's flashes of lightning and there's rumbling. Those are all kind of reachbacks into this idea that Jesus is seeing something in them in that moment. And he's like, you will be called the sons of thunder. I'm going to nickname you. That's a term of endearment. Now, how cool is it to have a nickname given to you by Jesus? Now, I know some of y'all have some nicknames. I had a couple growing up in high school. I don't really want to recall. I don't want to be called that anymore because things have changed. But to be called the Sons of Thunder by Jesus, to have a nickname, to be that close to Jesus is super, super cool. Now that closeness brought with it some kind of moments in their lives where they were trying to scratch their head and try to figure this out. Now there's a bunch of scriptures that we could have gone through, but I'm picking out a couple that are really kind of drawing us into this idea of who Jesus is and their understanding of who he is at that moment. See, they don't figure it all out right at the end. We have the luxury of knowing the entire story, but they're living this. This is their life as it's progressing. So you're going to see these different moments where, like in this one in particular with Jairus' daughter in Mark chapter 5, you're going to see this moment where they're just totally in awe. Check this out. In Mark chapter 5, it picks up like this. It says, while he was still speaking, this is Jesus, people came from the synagogue leader's house and said, your daughter is dead. Why, brother, teach anymore? I'm going to pause for 1 second because at that moment, Jesus is teaching the people because this one woman had come to her who had this medical condition of bleeding and she had touched his garment. He felt the power come out of him in that moment. And as he's teaching, he's overhearing this conversation. Why bother the teacher? Your daughter is dead. So in verse 36, it says, when Jesus overheard what was said, he told the synagogue leader, don't be afraid, only believe. He did not let anyone accompany him except Peter, James, and John, James's brother. they came to the leader's house, and he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child's not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, but he put them out all outside. He took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and entered the place where the child was. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk. She was 12 years old. At this, they were utterly astounded. Then he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this and told them to give her something to eat. What? All right, so James and John are brought into this. All these people are laughing at Jesus, saying like, "Oh, he's crazy. She's not asleep. She's dead." He's like, "Get out of here. She's asleep." So Jesus has power over death in that moment, and they're brought into that inner circle. They're brought into this moment where they begin to understand like, wow, he has the power over death. Oh, I thought he was just a prophet. I don't really know exactly like what was going on, but I think if I could give a conjecture in that moment, they were like, "Oh my goodness, like he just brought this girl back from the dead." So this idea of this being brought in close and this revealing of who Jesus is. And then he tells them not to say anything. So he nicknamed them Sons of Thunder, which would mean that like eventually at some point they're going to become thunderous. They're going to use their voices. They're going to use their lives at some point. But I don't want you to say anything just yet. Strange. But there's a purpose behind it, because if you travel a little bit farther in the Gospel of Mark in chapter 9, it picks up with the transfiguration. Now, transfiguration just means, for those of y'all who've never heard it before, it just means that it's a complete change in form, that Jesus goes from being just a regular looking guy, because the Bible says that you would pass him and you wouldn't even give him a second thought, from that to his divine glory being completely revealed. So it picks up in verse 2. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves to be alone. He was transfigured in front of them, and his clothes became dazzling, extremely white, as no launderer on earth could whiten them. Elijah appeared to them with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let's set up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah," because he did not know what to say since they were terrified. Oh my goodness. All right, like this moment, Jesus brings them up to the mountain. Remember, recalling back to the Old Testament, there's always this mountain experience where God's presence is. Jesus is there. He's bringing them to the top of a mountain. There's a lot there, but it's all a shadow and a type of being able to see who Jesus really is. And they see him become who he really is. Now, in another gospel account, God says, "This is my son, listen to him." Right? This is the one that I love. Listen to him. Peter's terrified. James and John are totally like silent, and they're not able to say anything. Peter says, "Why don't we just try to make you some shelters, or like so we can create a place of worship?" He says something because he's so nervous because he's terrified, right? That must have been a moment right there where like, okay, well, we just saw him raise this little girl from the dead. Now we see who he really is, right? To be able to do that, to be able to see him for who he is as a person, that would be enough for us right now, just to be able to see him, but then alone, not only to see him, but to see in his transfigured state. It's just amazing. It's Jesus is drawing them even further and compelling them to himself. But just like with Jairus' daughter, in verse 9, it says, as they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept this word to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. So right there, you see that they don't know what rising from the dead means. They're like, what do you mean rising from the dead? I don't understand. They don't have the whole picture, guys. They don't have the whole picture. So kind of keep your judgment on these guys. Withhold it until the whole story gets told, because there's an arc of their story. There's a beginning, and then there's this moment from who they were to who Jesus saw to who they would become, right? So with that being said, you've got this moment of calling down fire. Now, for those of you guys who remember, like with John, when you often think of James and John, we often think of John leaning against Jesus during the Last Supper, right? As just this man of love. We're going to get to him in a little while, but for right now, you got to understand this next thing. It's wild. So the story is that Jesus is trying to get to Jerusalem. He set his face like flint to Jerusalem, which means that he's going to this place where he's going to eventually die and resurrect and be raised. So the Samaritan village is standing in between him and that task. But the Samaritans, they reject Jesus' messengers, and John and James, they ask, hey, can we call down fire from heaven so we can just like burn up this little town that rejected you? And Jesus then rebukes them. Check this out. In Luke chapter 9, it says, when the days were coming to a close for him to be taken up, he determined to journey to Jerusalem. He sent messengers ahead of himself, and on the way they entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But they did not welcome him because he determined to journey to Jerusalem. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and consume them? But he turned, meaning Jesus, returned and rebuked them, and they went to another village. What in the world? Why would they say, call down fire from heaven and burn it up? All right, so remember, they are still thinking that Jesus is kind of like walking in the power of Elijah. Now, for us, we were like, well, what does that really mean? For them, it's very, very present because it's in the top of their mind that Elijah, remember that Elijah story in 2 Kings chapter 1? If you get an opportunity to check it out, go ahead and read it. It's about a guy named King Ahaziah, and this is crazy story that they're referencing, I believe, in this moment. That King Ahaziah he's ruling over Samaria. He's in the upstairs level. He falls through a lattice on the upstairs and hits the ground, and he's injured. He's totally hurt, almost to the point of death. So he sends messengers to inquire of these people who worship Beelzebub, which strangely enough, later on becomes another synonymous word for Satan. And Elijah hears about it. He goes and intercepts those messengers. And he's like, what? Is there not a God for you to worship? You have to go worship some other God? Well, King Ahaziah finds out about it, sends a dispatch of 50 pieces of his military, 50 men of his military and a captain. And Elijah then calls down fire, and they're just consumed by the fire. Then it happens a second time. This entire thing happens a second time. Another 50 go out, captain, and then Elijah calls down fire again. Boom. And then a third time, but that time the captain is smart enough to notice his context clues because all these things the ground is burnt from the previous dispatches that had been sent. And they go ahead and grab Elijah and they redirect that entire situation. Why is that important? Because that's their top of mind awareness. They hate Samaritans. They don't want to have anything to do with them. They reject them. And you notice in John chapter 4, when Jesus is talking to a woman at the well, she's from Samaria, right? They're ready to destroy these people at a moment's notice because they deserve it. Well, these guys, now we're beginning to understand a little bit more about their personalities. They're not gentle guys, but they're not really loud either. And that's what an interesting adjective about the James and John is, that they're full of zeal. Zeal is not loud. Zeal means great energy. It means enthusiasm. They're passionate about their master. They're passionate about Jesus, and they know his power. Why? Because they've seen him transfigured. They know that he could call fire down on them, but Jesus rebukes them. Now, there's more to this story. We're going to catch up to this in the next video. But for right now, what we want to really kind of settle in on is that, could you imagine being that close to Jesus during his ministry? I mean, not on like the periphery, not only in the 12, but in the close 3, Peter, James, and John, that like to be that close, to have Jesus as your best friend and to share that with your brother. I think that is just something I've missed for a long time. And why they're called sons of thunder, we'll find out a little bit more, even deeper as to the reason why they're called that. But for us right now, there's a really, really interesting part of this whole thing, is that how is it that someone could have a heart change for people? How can we have a heart change for people? And it's because of the nearness that we have with Jesus. See, this process, they didn't see what was happening in their lives, but Jesus saw that the closer that they got to Jesus, the more and more they started looking like him. They didn't look like that in the beginning, but eventually they started looking like that as time went on. And here's the coolest part, that Jesus called them his friend. And in John 15:15, it talks about how Jesus says that I've called you friend. He calls us friends. But how is it that we're a friend? And if we do what he tells us to do. And what is he telling us to do? He's telling us to love one another, to follow his commands and to love one another. He said, I've called you friends if you do what I command. And then later on, he says, my command is to do what? And it's this one thing. And that's what John, the life of John, would be most known for, and that is love. To love one another. And not only to love one another, but to love one another as I have loved you. That's the beautiful picture of this whole thing, is that James and John are going to learn how to love because they've been in close nearness to Jesus. You know, when we go out on our events together as a church, and we go to feed the homeless and we go to serve them, I was a little nervous, to be honest, when I was going out there for the first time. And I know that some of you guys, I know in particular, I can think of several of you that were really, really nervous. But my brother included. And we went together, and it was the coolest thing. It was really, really cool to see like my brother's kind of like perspective of the whole thing change. He had some poor experiences in the past, but God redeemed that. And we were able to share Christmas together, eating a giant meal down there in the city. So I just wanted to share that with you right now. I'm going to pause here because there's plenty more for us to discuss, but I think we've discussed enough, because how close are you to Jesus? How near are you? And when people think of you, do they think of Jesus? I hope that they do. God bless you guys. Enjoy your time of discussion.